The rain was pouring hard, and she stood there, drenched, clutching her little daughter's hand, looking up at the towering glass building. "Can I stay here just for tonight?" she asked, her voice trembling but steady. The lobby was almost empty, and the single dad CEO looked down at her with a mix of surprise and curiosity. He wasn't used to people walking into his life like this, unexpected, vulnerable, and in need. Yet there was something about her eyes, tired but fierce, that made him pause. She was a single mom, struggling to make ends meet, and he was a man who had built an empire but had built walls around his own heart. Their worlds shouldn't have collided, and yet, here they were, in the middle of a storm that seemed to demand change. Every second ticked with tension, and neither of them knew what might happen if he said yes or no. As she waited, shivering, he looked out at the rain, wrestling with an answer that could change both of their lives forever. His voice broke the silence, but the words were more than either of them expected. What would he say? He finally spoke, his voice low and cautious. "It's not that simple," he said, glancing at the tiny hand in hers. She nodded, understanding more than she let on. Life had taught her to survive on little, to face closed doors without complaint. But this wasn't just any door, it was the door to a world she had never belonged to, a world of wealth, power, and rules she had no idea how to navigate. She had been running on empty for months, juggling work, bills, and her daughter's needs, always one step away from losing everything. And now, standing in front of someone who could make all the difference, she felt a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. The CEO, on the other hand, had built his life around control, schedules, and predictability. A single mom with her own chaos was the last thing he expected to encounter. As the rain drummed against the windows, he studied her quietly, noting the resilience in her posture and the weariness in her eyes. He knew saying yes could append his carefully organized life, but saying no felt wrong. The tension hung between them, thick and unspoken, and neither could predict the ripple this moment might cause. Something had shifted, but the question remained: what would he decide next? He hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing on him like the storm outside. Every instinct told him to keep his distance, to protect the boundaries he had built over years of hard work and solitude. Yet, looking at her the way she stood tall, despite exhaustion, the quiet strength she carried for her child, he felt a pull he hadn't expected. This wasn't just about letting someone stay for the night. It was about opening a door he hadn't thought he'd ever unlock. Meanwhile, she tried to read his expression, searching for a hint of kindness, a crack in his composed exterior. She knew she couldn't push too hard. Her pride was fragile, and her daughter was watching every move, trusting her mother to make the right choice. Her life had been a constant struggle to protect her little girl, and she couldn't risk disappointment now. As they stood in the quiet lobby, other stories swirled around them, employees whispering in the shadows, the distant hum of luxury cars in the parking lot, a world so close, yet so foreign. Each second stretched, amplifying the tension. Every thought seemed to collide, safety versus freedom, control versus compassion, fear versus hope. Both of them sensed that tonight's decision might unravel more than just a temporary roof over her head. It could change the course of their lives in ways neither could predict. The minutes dragged like hours, each one heavier than the last. She shifted her daughter slightly behind her, feeling the tiny hand clutch hers tighter, a silent plea that spoke louder than words. The single dad CEO walked slowly toward the elevator, then paused, turning back to look at her. The air between them was electric, charged with unspoken questions and possibilities. Every option seemed risky, every choice a test of courage and trust. He thought of his carefully constructed life, the empire he had built, and the reputation he guarded fiercely. Letting her in, even for one night, could invite chaos, rumors, complications he had never faced. Yet he couldn't ignore the flicker of empathy, the instinct to protect, the curiosity about this woman who seemed so ordinary, yet carried an extraordinary strength. On the other hand, felt the weight of vulnerability pressing down on her chest. She had been forced to hide her needs for so long, but now, standing in this lobby, every fear and hope collided. Could she trust a man who had never needed anyone before? Could he understand the stakes of her life, her daughter's future? The elevator dinged, the doors sliding open with an almost menacing finality. Their eyes met, hearts racing, breaths held. The moment had arrived, the point where a single decision could shatter routines, reveal truths, and change everything. And yet, neither of them spoke, both caught in the tension of what might happen next. Just as he was about to speak, the elevator doors closed with a sudden whoosh, cutting the silence like a knife. They both jumped slightly, and she glanced at her daughter, who looked up with wide, questioning eyes. Then came the unexpected sound, a sharp, hurried knock on the lobby door, followed by a man's authoritative voice calling his name. The CEO's brow furrowed, tension flashing across his face. This was no ordinary interruption. It was someone from his world, someone who didn't know her, someone who could change everything in an instant. She felt a chill run down her spine. Who was this man? And why did his presence make the air feel heavier, more dangerous? Suddenly, her temporary plea for shelter seemed even riskier. Her instincts screamed caution, but her daughter's trust left her little room to retreat. The CEO's eyes darted toward her, conflicted, He had been ready to make a decision, but now an unseen pressure forced him to reconsider. Secrets, power, and responsibility collided in that moment. Every choice had consequences. And the storm outside mirrored the storm inside. As the door handle rattled again, both of them realized that tonight was no longer just about one night's shelter. The stakes had skyrocketed, and the path forward was suddenly uncertain. The question wasn't simply whether she could stay. It was whether either of them could survive the consequences of the next few minutes. The CEO's hand hovered over the door, his jaw tight as he considered the man outside. Then, with a sudden breath, he stepped forward and opened it. The stranger froze, taken aback, but it was clear he wasn't here for a casual visit. He carried documents, a briefcase full of evidence that could ruin the CEO's reputation if mishandled. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt, her heart pounding, her daughter clinging to her side. Without hesitation, he ushered her inside, closing the door firmly behind them. "Stay here," he said, his voice low but decisive. Then, for the first time, he let himself show something more than control. Vulnerability, trust, even a hint of fear. Together, they faced the stranger, negotiating, strategizing, and maneuvering through the threat with a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Hours passed, and by the early morning the danger had passed, but the encounter had changed them both. She realized that vulnerability could be strength, and he understood that opening his life to someone else didn't mean losing control. Just as relief began to settle, her phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number: "You're not safe, and neither is he." The storm had passed outside, but inside, their lives would never be the same. The night's events had solved one conflict, but a new, even more dangerous mystery was already waiting. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, softening the tension that had gripped the night. She sat on the leather sofa, her daughter asleep in her lap, and finally allowed herself to breathe. The CEO stood nearby, a quiet presence rather than a barrier, watching over them with a protective calm that felt strangely comforting. The danger from the night before had forced them into an unspoken bond, one built on trust, respect, and the shared knowledge that life could change in an instant. They talked quietly, sharing small stories, discovering laughter in the most unexpected moments. He offered her not just a roof for the night, but a chance to start fresh. A space where she and her daughter could feel safe and supported. She realized that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was courage. That by the time the sun fully rose, decisions had been made, plans set, and hearts shifted. The single dad CEO, who once guarded his world, now understood the strength and connection. She, the single mom, knew that life's storms could be weathered with the right ally by her side. As they watched the city wake, a quiet understanding passed between them. The night had ended, but their journey together was just beginning, full of hope, resilience, and unexpected possibilities.